Do you okay, we are almost to our goal. Can you believe it? This is like so intense and amazing. It's like, thank you all, thank you all, thank you all. Oh, did we mention we've had a Kickstarter starting? So we launched officially on Monday, although we had a little pre-launch set up after I emailed all of our very special Dragon Common Room supporters, and we had a little, Sunday special where everybody got to sneak peek in and get in there. But our big public launch was on Monday, and you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your support for our poetry, your support for our art, and for joining us in this art war. We obviously want to talk to you about the Kickstarter and what we're doing and why we're doing it, why poetry, why dragons, why we are going to convince you tonight to go out and convince all of your friends that we need more poetry about dragons. Welcome to the Mosaic Arc. Can you believe how well we're doing? Isn't it amazing? I'm over the moon, obviously. This is you guys. Thank you so much for your support. And those of you who have not yet supported, we know you will, because this is a really great project. And I realized, of course, that this is basically why we started the Mosaic Arc, to be able to do this episode where we tell you why we're doing it. Right? No, because that art is like condensed and diamond-like and gem-like, and everything's sort of folded in on itself, and then it takes centuries of explication to figure out what it is that went into the art. It's like we make this diamond, and then we have to unpack it all for you. And Kilt and I really started our journey with you last summer, talking about Aurora Borealis and in the darkest earth, the great light glows, and realizing that if we embed things into a story in the way that we are with Aurora Borealis and DRACO ALCHEMICUS, the whole point is that it takes unlocking and layers of revelation and such. It's not because we hope that you feel, well, I mean, we do hope you feel like you're being introduced to new mysteries and such, but not because they're hidden, but because they're manifest and we haven't been able to see them, and that we're working in this revelation. So we're happy to be thinking about this with you tonight.
Yeah, it's like going on a treasure hunt. The feeling that we want for everyone to be able to read the stories and feel like they're on a treasure hunt and they're finding things, and to make it interesting so that, anybody that picks up the books will be able to find things that are personal to them, and also things that they can talk about with other people that are reading them. It's like lots of things in the Pirate's Cave to go through. Yeah, we're very excited. Yeah. I'm very excited.
She's so excited she can't speak yet. I'm gonna have to drag this in. No. The thing is that we because like there's a huge surge and has been for some years now, but we can feel it building. But okay, so back up a little bit. When you're working on a piece of art and you're noticing things, you're attending to patterns and images and stories and things like that, suddenly everything in the world is talking to you. And it's a little bit like the way C.S. Lewis talks about the music of the spheres. It's like the music of the planets is around us all the time, but we can't hear it because it's around us all the time. So that being the premise of his Out of the Silent Planet, that when his character goes out beyond the influence of Earth, suddenly he can hear this music that's there all the time. And our role as artists is to try to hear, to try to listen. And it's not that the things weren't there, or that, I mean, or that we're magicking things into being, right? We don't think that. We're not creating out of nothing. We are drawing your attention to things that you knew all along, but now hopefully can see that you hadn't seen before. And that therefore, hopefully it feels like, you know, if you go on an Easter egg hunt or something, you find the Easter eggs, you're delighted because you found them, but you know what they are when you find them. So we're trying to give you all that sensation of seeing the mysteries that you knew you were inside of already, but can now appreciate more fully.
Yeah, it's like a guide map to a city that everybody's grown up in, and you're so used to hearing traffic, roaring traffic noises, that you don't sort of tune into the symphony of the experience of being in the place. And yeah, I think that's what we're doing. I mean, like, we have this very strange process as a writing team, where I suppose it's that we're paying attention to particular things, but we wanted to look at the theme of our civilization that feels now very, very chaotic, and that begin altogether to find the patterns in it that are actually guiding, you know, the rhythm of our life in this particular civilization. So I don't know, it's kind of like it's like hearing music and doing doing sketches at the same time when we're writing this poem. Yeah, we're kind of making sound word songs out of the noise of the everyday. Yeah,
but what we want everybody to appreciate is that we're not, so the Kickstarter is obviously trying to make it all a little mysterious and such, because if you're going into a story, you want to say, okay, there's a pleasure in learning the riddles, right? And saying, it's like, here's a puzzle. Yes. And I, for one, I mean, back when I read a lot of novels, I read on the one hand mystery novels, and on the other one historical novels. And historical novels are interesting because, of course, the whole idea is that you already know what happened. And the challenge for the novelist is to make you feel like you understand that event or situation better than you had previously. With a mystery novel, there's no mystery. It's like there's a dead body at the beginning, right? Or, you know, there's a sort of set up tension, dead body, and then you have to solve what it is. And the challenge for the mystery writer is to give you as reader enough hints along the way so that when the solution to the murder is given you, you feel satisfied because there've been, you know, clues along the way that you may or may not have recognized as the thing pointing to the culprit. That's not the right word, murderer. But you know, you're pointing to the perpetrator, but you are satisfied as a reader if all of those pieces come together and you say, aha, okay, it's meaningful, right? And this being, so it's been a wild week, right? Getting our Kickstarter launched, and there's also my other video life. Patrick Coffin has a new course up on he's co-sponsoring with a new partner, Ryan, who, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your last name, Moreau, I believe, that they're doing Hope is Fuel. That one was launching this past week. We had our big symposium on Friday on the University of Chicago campus talking about the failure of academia, to talk about the stuff and the lockdowns and the mandates,
thing.
the thing that, and of course, all of this for us is going into, in Draco Alchemicus, in Dragon Come Room, it's all going into Draco Alchemicus, because we're saying these are all pieces of this pattern, the way people behave around religion, the way people behave around medicine. The Draco of our story is the alchemical dragon of both, you know, medicine, science, and spirituality, religiosity, mythology. That being said, now I forgot what I was saying, but yeah, and I was also wrapping up my course on Tolkien on campus. And the thing about Tolkien is that he is trying to show you this creative process. He's trying to show you what it's like being sub-creators, making stories. But the satisfaction, and this is where I was getting to, the satisfaction of this, the reading that you get is, you find yourself in the story too. That's why everybody wants to be hobbits. They sometimes want to be elves, but they mainly want to be hobbits, because the hobbits are the ones that frame the story for us, that make it possible for us to see it as part of our story. And saying that this is what we're trying to do with Draco Alchemicus. There's a mystery in it, obviously, but our hope is that what we've done is tell you a story you actually already know, but you don't necessarily realize you know, and that our story will help you point to things in your own life that you recognize as part of that story as well. So it's the one story. There's only one story, but there is this sense of, can we feel it? Can we feel ourselves within the patterns of the revelation? If that's not mysterious, we don't know what is, because we really don't want to just tell you what we wrote, right? We really like you to have the pleasure of finding yourself in this mystery and then working through it, right? Because that's why we like stories, not just here's the answer. It's not catechism, right? It's like the answer is, and now you repeat it back. No. We're saying you get inside the story and it teaches you to see yourself in these patterns.
Yes. I'm thinking the equivalent would be when we are read to as children and we're reading nursery rhymes, or we're reading the old folk tales, the old fairy tales, and everybody knows them because they're the familiar patterns of, you know, oh, I want to hear a story. What kind of story are we going to hear? Okay, well, we'll hear these ones because these are their familiar folk tales. They're all retold and retold over and over and over again, because people find value in them, even though they don't necessarily have to be magical, or you know, they're not creating things that don't exist. They're using things that exist and kind of not remixing, but, you know, showing the different sides to the human experience in this little folktale, to hit on something very primal in the human life and human experience. You know, like Hansel and Gretel getting led into the dark forest by their, you know, starving father, and you know, these kinds of things where the forest itself becomes magical. It's not like the story is holding some deep symbolism that only the storyteller knows and can hide from everybody and keep it from everybody. It's the revelation of the experience of something like what it means to be in the forest, you know, and battling your own circumstances, your own poverty, and then finding yourself in, you know, this gingerbread house, which could be anything for anybody. You know, that's kind of what I really like about those old stories, is that there is no right answer that you have to be initiated into in order to know what the gingerbread house is. That gingerbread house is going to be something for everybody that hears the tale. So I think that's what we're doing. We're allowing people to have their own experience in what we're creating because that's what every human life is in the big story. As you were saying, there is only one story, and we all have our own journey through the woods, so to speak. But then it's a part of something bigger as well. So we're showing both at the same time. No initiation. It's more of a playful revelation of what it means to be human. Yeah.
Well, so we were talking about this today, that there's difference between stories that are occult, that promise you secret knowledge, that give you powers. Right. And that is, I mean, so to say, so we're writing we say it's an electric fairy tale. We skirted around a lot of different genre labels for what we're doing, because we're saying, what is it exactly? And I say it's fairy tale is the closest, because we're working within Tolkien's definition of fairy tale, that you want to have this secondary reality that the story takes you into, and that there is some kind of framework of the story that puts you into fairyland, which is fairyland having its own rules and its own challenges and in its own reality is necessary. But we said it's electric because we're thinking about it in terms of the media experiences that we've been talking through with our mosaic and our internet, and our sense of the storytelling we're doing is obviously taking place in this media environment. So our electric fairy tale, but that it's different from there's occult genres of, how do you say it, like demonology and stuff, stories, I don't know, that are, the promise to the characters is always, you find this book. I'm thinking of Deborah Harkness's Witches series, right? Because she's modeling those off of John Dee's Angel Conversations that we've definitely read about, so that we have that in the background of our thinking of, okay, so what kind of like mystical knowledge are we expecting people to feel like they're getting? But in Harkness's story, she has her main character find a manuscript that has secret information that gives you workings and powers, right? Our story won't do that for you. Yes. You're not going to get secret powers out of reading Draco Alchemicus. We are actually showing you the danger of wanting secret powers by way of alchemy and science and other operations that you might guess. And of course, our Draco Alchemicus, is definitely meant to suggest that kind of problem. But our story itself is not intended to give you that kind of occult wisdom, because that kind of occult wisdom is the whole point of the seduction that we want to show people don't get caught up in. So that's initiation right into an occult story. Whereas if we're reading the scriptures, to say what Tolkien says about the Gospels is that they are a fairy story, right? They're the fairy story where legend and history has met and fused, that art and the reality have been realized again, that in the incarnation the creator enters into the story, and that is the story that we most want to believe in terms of the transition from primary reality to secondary reality, except where we recognize that we are actually in secondary reality, which is the primary reality of whatever, right? The gospel. That in that kind of experience, it's the one that the hobbits have in the story when they see themselves in the grand story of the Silmarils because of the light of Arendelle the star. And then once they recognize themselves in the grand story of the Silmarils, they recognize themselves in the grand story of creation, which the Anilindale tells of the music. And that kind of sort of shimmering echo of we're in the same tale still is an entirely different kind of experience from saying, oh yes, now I have occult knowledge and I can control, because of course that's what the ring promises, and we don't do that.
No. There's no control over matter, that other stories would promise. The ability to override the laws of nature, and what is it, secondary causality, you know, the laws that the creator has put into effect in his artwork, that people are thirsty to override through their secrets and secret teachings, which are really secret stories that people are not allowed to hear. These things are not what Draco Alchemicus is giving. It's a I would say it's a kind of warning against wanting it, but it's probably more than a warning. What we're doing is, I think, highlighting that this practice is now much more common than people are willing to see. They've become so accustomed to initiation rituals as the way of accessing mysticism and the mystical, that the culture is sort of desensitized to initiation and secrecy as a way to gain power. People don't think like hobbits anymore. They, you know, it's like we've been the culture's been influenced by ring bearers instead of hobbits for a very long time. Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it's like we could do better comparisons on this if I could think of like modern stories that I watch on television, but I won't watch them because they're so dark. That, you know, you the protagonist in most sort of horror fantasy or sci-fi are the only one in possession of whatever knowledge it is that's going to either wreck the system or liberate you from the system. And that as we're saying in the Christian tradition is a very great temptation of Gnosticism. You know, you know, the entire time I've been working on study of scripture and the history of Christianity and such, there's always someone that comes up and says, you know, do you know about the Gnostics? And you're like, yeah, you learn about those in college because everybody reads them and they're like 3 texts. And they die out in orthodoxy because they are promising something that is, you know, that gnosis, that hidden wisdom that Jesus communicates only to the select few, and that kind of promise is one, anti-incarnational, because usually the Gnostic Jesus is not in fact incarnate. There's ways in which he's apparent, you know, there's an appearance of incarnation or something like that, but that the idea being that we are trapped in our incarnation and the gnosis is the liberation, right? So it's anti-material, but it's sort of anti-human in the sense, I mean, you could say a lot of the things that we were battling right now with the sort of ideas of not so much AI, but if I could translate my consciousness into some kind of other, I mean, it's always has to be some other carrier, because we can't, I mean, we do actually have souls and they're immortal, and so you don't need, you know, the other carrier is yourself, but that we're going to translate ourselves into some kind of other machine-like thing and be immortal. Well, that's all a Gnostic kind of imagining that will escape from this polluting physicality that we participate in. Whereas, of course, Orthodox Christianity is one, it's spoken plainly in the world, although there are ways in which Jesus says that, you know, I spoke to the apostles privately, but then they wrote it down in the gospel. So they're there for everybody. And that this knowledge is meant to, I mean, I suppose, in one hand, show us who we truly are, but also liberate us from that secret stuff. That premise of secrecy, that only the select few can have it.
Sorry, 1 second.
Wait, is the real world intruding into your audio space? Oh yes.
The
Okay.
incarnational
The
world.
incarnational world
It
is so.
It's invading my digital experience.
So we have Casey's talking about sketching a portrait with words. Yes, in our post. So Casey and Mel, you guys, you can help us talk about what we're forgetting to say. People are numb to the dangers of a degenerated culture. Yes, absolutely. So
Hold on, I'm going to run and come back.
okay, I will go back to myself. Okay, so she has the internet does not possess her entirely. It does possess us. I will say that thanks to my begging, pleading, and having met in person at BaseCon last year, the Dark Herald has given us a very beautiful write-up for our why we need the poetry that we need, and I encourage you all to go visit his account on Archaven. But it's just too much. It's beautiful, saying American poetry. There was a time, believe it or not, that it was central to American life. People would attend, in fact, pay good money for professional readings. It's like we need to have a professional reading of our Draco Alchemicus, which we do have volunteer. One of our former poets in Centrism Games is interested in. I'll bring you back into the camera here. She's back. She's back. Okay. I'm telling them about Dark Herald's wonderful piece on saying why we need this, right? So we've been talking talking about why we need the kind of story that we're describing, which is revelatory and pattern making, and you should feel yourself and find yourself in it. But that we're writing it, of course, in verse, and that matters as well. And we want to convince you all that it's accessible in ways you didn't appreciate. Maybe right, that yes. Saying, we're doing it in Spenserian stanzas and it rhymes and things like that. Well, one, that's been incredibly important for our writing process, because poetry requires precision that is very, very, very cut down, right? It's like you don't waste words in having to make them scan and rhyme and fit the stanzas. And we're rewriting each act in 100 stanzas, so we'll have 500 total in the book when we finish the whole thing over the next several years. And that kind of crisp and careful writing, I mean, we've gotten better at it, I think, in the internet world, because everybody, if you're in a text chat room, you can't spend a lot of wall text, right? Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to read it. You learn how to be crisp and precise in your written text. But the thing that we don't have culturally at the moment is a consciousness of how important this kind of shaped language is for the public conversation. And what's interesting is we do have music, but unfortunately the lyrics in a lot of our music have gotten very plain. I mean, they may be rhythmic and they may rhyme and things like that, but they've lost a lot of the complexity that older poetry used to have. And the Dark Herald is pointing to this, saying, it used to be that people would just, a symbol for readings of poetry. And he says, in the same way that everyone today knows the basics of Star Wars and Harry Potter, all Americans of a bygone era knew a list of famous poems by heart. Everyone had read Passage to India, The Song of Hiawatha, Hope is a Thing with Feathers, and The Raven. You had only to speak a fragment and a perfect stranger could finish it for you. Quoth the Raven, nevermore. Right? So the poetry, interestingly, used to be the cultural form that we now experience shared in movies and television shows and things like that. That it was the sung sounds that people had that tied them together. So if we say, we need culture, we need poetry to tie together our memories and our stories, and that poetry used to be the thing. Poetry is a very ancient form. It's like the most ancient literature and stories is poems. It's Gilgamesh, it's Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, it's the Aeneid, it's Beowulf. That poetry is the primal training of the mind in stories and the heart and the body and things like that. So until very recently, it used to still have that presence, and that therefore we felt like we had a shared culture. But he said, the Dark Herald says, poetry is quite possibly the oldest art form in existence. Before written records were created, poetry was used to pass down history, teach life lessons, and perhaps most important of all, internalize learning. Hymns are doctrine set to music. right? So if you want to understand what happened to Christianity, for example, you're not singing enough, frankly. Or you're not singing hymns, which are a particular kind of metrical poetry.
Yeah, well, we've got our nursery rhymes, so it's the rhyme that rocks the cradle. And this is the formation of like a understanding of our story as human beings when we're being sung to, when we're being rhymed to. And singing hymns is usually the beginning of catechism for children that are attending church. Before they can even read, they start to hear sung hymns. And this is how they begin to enter into the story of the Bible and the understanding of Christianity and who Christ is. It's singing. So it's the poetry being the high art of oral culture, pre-literate culture, and high art that doesn't rely on written technology, like no alphabets. You don't need to have any literacy in order to master a poetic form. And I think that's where it's very wonderful, because it's not limited to technological ability. A culture can achieve greatness in poetic format without having anything written down.
And yeah, just that's important. It's like we said, we're writing electric fairy tale and poetry, so we're writing this highly technological story in the most humanly basic form, which is poems, the language. Yes. And we have talked about that before. I think maybe we'll assume that you all don't watch absolutely every episode that we do and memorize it, because we haven't. That we come back to themes. It's because they I mean, things need to recur for people to really embed them in their understanding. And so we're getting this back to trying to convince people of the significance of the breathed rhythms, which you get if you sing. And it's interesting how much people sing. I think you sing karaoke, you're singing somebody else's lyrics. You sing in church, you usually using hymn books. So that, how you train yourself through the repetition of these poems and stories. And what the Herald talks about, he's saying, the modern poetry, written poetry is usually, one, if you read it out loud, it doesn't make any sense. It just sounds like prose, and you can't see that there's rhythm to it because it's just laid out on the page. It's very visual, right? You have to look at it to see that it's poetry. And he gives an example from Jack Kerouac. I saw that my life was a vast glowing empty page, and I could do anything I wanted. Right. Now I could read it the way it's laid out on the page, but that is basically a sentence that he then just like breaks into, and there's no rhythm to it, or it wouldn't be different if it was only oral.
Yeah, the phrase exists in a vacuum.
Right.
Sorry, the phrase exists in a vacuum. It has no frame because the rhythm isn't there. Yeah.
Right.
And it doesn't have the same effect. You don't really want to memorize that sentence.
Yes, why would you?
Where there's no pleasure in digesting it and repeating it over and over and over again, because there's no pattern to follow.
Right, but with like nursery rhymes or something, it's like those are the ones that you can remember because they get into your structures. So and the other thing is that the Herald talks about is poetry is pure creation, which is why the enemy hates it. And definitely, I in my Tolkien videos in my class, I talk a lot about that, because the first thing Tolkien writes to try to explain himself to Lewis is a poem in iambic pentameter. It's the Mythopoeia. And everything that he writes after that, his novels, the Silmarillion and the other stories, they're all exercises in unpacking this one poem that he wrote, which in fact enfolds everything into it. So it's the purity of the poems is very important. So that's why it's like, that's why we need poetry. But we
Yes.
promised them that you were going to talk through what you wrote, and I think maybe you're kind of embedded. You're still embedded in the depths of this article you published in Gab for their Christian. Where did they put it in the strong Christian artistry? Yeah, but they also have a subset of things on their blog, which is bold Christian writing. Right, so we'll be bold in artists, bold, well, whatever. Okay, so the thing is, I think there's enough in here. It's Storytime is Art War, that the Storytime is the art war, that it's worth just working through this and unpacking it, because it's really everything that we've been trying to work on, and why we really need you to be reading our poem when we publish it. What's an art war? You start this. I mean, I love your opening. We live in a planetary art war. Well, yes.
Yeah, we do. I was thinking about many things at once, as I usually do. Everyone's familiar with the phrase culture wars, and everybody uses it, so much that it's become linked to the concept of standing on a stage and having a debate between people that have different political ideologies. And DCR is not interested in political ideology whatsoever. We're interested in Christ and beauty and goodness and truth, and whatever falls from that. But they're the transcendentals that we want to be focused on. And so I was thinking about how what we're doing really is not culture war, because we're not debating. And then I was thinking about the the funny accident of finding myself with you talking at the beginning of a global pandemic, and then you saying, okay, now we're all going to learn iambic pentameter.
And what else do you do during a pandemic?
What are you going to do? Okay, I'll stay home. You can only, have so many days in hard lockdown before you really start to need some kind of mental stimulation. And everywhere we were hearing the same thing. It was, cases, and then mandates. And so we were kind of locked in this sterile language. Everyone's hand sanitizing, and suddenly everybody's saying the same phrases over and over again. I'm thinking, our speech is getting hijacked by this virus. This virus is like a biological thing, or is it the meme of the thing is the virus? Because now the language is being completely hijacked by it. And you had us doing iambic, so I'd never done iambic before. And then we're looking at the definition of what an iamb is. It's a foot. Dun 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 dun, stepping. And then I'm thinking, okay, we've got the heartbeat of the English language in that iambic. Dun 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 dun. We've got the foot stepping. And it just clicked that it was like having infantry, and how they're all in perfect formation going bum, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. So it sort of came to me as an idea that what we're doing is art war. And we're doing art war against colonizers of our mother tongue. And I can say this because hopefully now, with some context and how it's been phrased, the nursery rhymes, the rhymes that rock the cradle of our culture, our civilization, this is where we're formed. And these stories are being hijacked by people all the time. Doesn't matter who it is. And everybody is rushing to do culture war and to have political debate and political, fights with everybody about their ideology. But we were the only ones really paying attention to what was going on with the formation of our mother tongue. And when you were explaining to us that, poetry was everywhere in English education and then vanished suddenly. And I thought, okay, this is a really interesting moment for us as English speakers, because this isn't happening to other cultures. It's English. What's going on with the English language that we're not paying attention to our cultivation of folk stories? Well, we're not. There's some people that are. Some people are very, very interested in story time for children. So then I'm thinking, okay, now this makes sense. It starts to fit, because, I mean, we're now shifting away from political debates with grown adults to, don't worry about it. It's irrelevant. What we're going to do is we're going to go into the nursery rhyme field, and we're going to create our own folk stories, or we're going to create our own kindergarten of mythology. And then I realized that this is essentially what we're all having to do now, is level up to different warfare. It's a different level of warfare now, in terms of being able to define ourselves without a colonial imposition over our mother tongue. So yeah.
Well,
and
the thing is,
colonialism.
it was always, I mean, the warfare has always been at this level in terms of culture. It's like when Virgil's writing the Aeneid, he knows very well what he's doing, which is creating a new mythology for Rome, which takes it to Troy. Everybody ends up coming from Troy. It's very interesting. And the story that we are saying that we took our stanza structure from is the Fairy Queen. That one was written. We've talked about that 2-3 episodes ago, as you know, Spenser trying to get money to praise Queen Elizabeth. but he was doing it very consciously as a recrafting of a myth for the Protestant Elizabethan court, and you know that it's highly anti-Catholic. His Fairy Queen is as anti-Catholic as you can get. That the monsters in the story are the church, Duessa. I mean, everybody says Spenser, the Fairy Queen is difficult to understand because it's so allegorical and such. And we talked about that as well, that he's putting characters from his own day in, which always gets more difficult the further away in time you get from when those people were significant to the community. But what he was doing was purposefully and consciously trying to remake the mythology of the Arthurian stories of knights and chivalry and such into this new virtue of Protestant Elizabethan court culture, as it were. And so I mean, it's interesting, therefore it's interesting to some of the culture war stuff we've watched over the last few years. I mean, you're thinking about the story time that has been happening in the libraries recently, but there have been also things like Dr. Seuss being canceled because of some of the drawings in his books. But I think I mean, whether Dr. Seuss is a good guy or a bad guy, you know, everybody has these adult backstories. Don't you realize that those grown-ups that were writing all those kids stories for you, they did other things, right? And Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel did a lot of other stuff in terms of adult style artwork and things. But you know,
that was the same.
Yes. So you know, the kid story authors typically had some purpose in their stripping things down into story form. But again, it's like it's sort of astonishing that, you know, I don't know, whichever side we think we're on Christian side, right? We're on the Christ side of the culture, whatever we're in, has not been engaged more purposefully in writing stories, right? It's like we're always worrying about losing the culture. It's like, well, you don't just lose it. You can't understand the old stories unless you're making your new ones in response to those old stories. So I'm getting tongue tied because it's so obvious to me, but we need those stories. So you were thinking, and we got Mel and Casey talking about Okay, Mel in her comments is sort of going where we're going to go, but we're not quite there yet. So we say we recognize that the primacy of the story time is one of the things that we need to be dealing with, and that it seemed funny that in the midst of I do like what you said, that we were doing it, we become this one story in COVID. In COVID, we entered all time.
Yes.
Mass culture was pivoted to the hope of pharmacological salvation from the plague around us. The alchemical desire of mankind for healing was amplified as the entire internet became a maelstrom of medical debate. And yet we found our healing in our story time, where art became our focus. Art was our immunity to the fear. It was also the way for us to craft our own narrative within the chaos of lockdowns. And as we created this narrative, we began to understand the power of telling stories that orientated our focus away from fear and towards the only serpent who cures all. Dun, dun, dun. Spoiler alert! Yeah, we were doing it on purpose all along. The brazen serpent of Numbers 21, 4-9. It's like our Draco Alchemicus is, they're twins throughout it, so you have to pay attention. Right, but that we were taking the situation of fear and that story that was being cast around us and cast over us. We were very clear about that. Cast over us of, if you must be afraid. I was watching, thanks to the symposium we had on campus on Friday, some of the people that were there, really, Scott Atlas, Jay Bhattacharya, Jonathan Turley, Todd Sawicki, Casey Mulligan. These some of my John Burge. These are people that are, you may know their names. Leslie Manukian of Health Freedom Defense Fund. I mean, we were all talking about, why academia failed to respond with actual research and complexity to the situation, because we just got this, sort of top-down, media-driven ring, as I say, right? It's like that one ring to rule them all is the media narrative. And one of the things I asked is like, why did, it's like, well, why did we fail? What was it we failed? And I suggested, I wasn't really speaking, I was leading a panel to a certain extent, but I was also thinking, the symposium was brilliant. Thank you all for coming, but we didn't get to the core of the problem in my mind, because we didn't get to the part of the storytelling. We didn't get to the part where it was just this overriding, not just propaganda feeling, although that was definitely that, but this fairy tale of monsters that nobody was able to say boo to, right? And if you tried, of course, you could lose your job, you could get shut out of your dorm, you could, get coerced into, but mainly through fear, into taking medicines that would hurt you and sometimes kill you. And therefore ironic for those of us in the Dragon Common Room that we found out writing iambic pentameter an hour every day was the cure to that level of assault on our psyches.
Yes. It was very important, especially being down here in Australia. We had been restricted so much that after the very, very long time of hard lockdowns, curfews and other things that were going on, people started to feel like they were not in control of their own lives anymore. And I certainly had that feeling where all the rhythm of a normal day had evaporated, and the days had been stretched and bled into each other, and then it's like the stars are whirling overhead and you don't really know what month you're in anymore, because that was the feeling. Probably something very similar to a solitary confinement, and it's because we'd all lost agency over the writing of our daily life. I'm going to do this today, I'm going to go and see this person, I'm going to plan. It was gone. So the structure of time had been taken away from us because we lost access to it in the same way that we were used to having. And so having tea time every day was like being pulled into a small a small oasis in this very insane desert without form. You've got this kind of swirling mountains of sand that change every day. There's no landscape to attach yourself to, and that's how it felt with time. And then suddenly we had tea time, so I was like, okay, oasis. There's form here. There's structure. There's you guys get the metaphor, you get the point. But it was really important because beyond that small moment of structure where we were refining language and being incredibly disciplined, there was no other opportunity to do something in the same way, and speak about something that wasn't despair, which was really important, because every conversation I was having with people was either in defense of the mandates, or a fear of COVID, or a fear of death, or rage against the mandates, rage against the people that were going along with it. But regardless of the position, everything everywhere was just despair. So it was like drowning in it. And so tea time was this beautiful respite from it. We could actually make something beautiful and control what we were saying, and have some beauty in our speech that wasn't connected to the virus. So having that regularity and that discipline was an anchor, and then also learning to speak with a regularity, that iambic, da-dun, da-dun, da-dun. So it was like, okay, finally we have a metronome for time.
But then you say, it's like you're describing it as this was like it was in the COVID time. But the thing is, it's what humanity lives in otherwise. It's like we have this problem that we think of modernity is all mechanized, and you get the metronome and it's got clocks, and there's a very significant watch in our story. And that can be described as something that's, just, overstructured and dehumanizing and things like that. But the opposite is the problem too. It's like without a sense, human beings, we make stories and we make giant clocks like Stonehenge. That sense of being able to mark time seems to be incredibly important to us, and that stories are a way, our poetry and our stories are a way of creating meaning out of the flow, right? Otherwise, which the animals don't seem to be bothered by, but we definitely are. If we don't have a sense of not just schedule, but also structure that gives meaning to each day, we despair. You've talked about it before as like dream time or something. It's like if we're sort of drowning in the impressions and sensations, and language is designed for us to be able to make meaning out of time. I've also thought about it. I was one time sitting on a balcony looking out over the trees with my brother, and I felt like I wanted to talk to him because I don't get to see him that often. I just wanted to talk, and then talking would be doing something that was bringing in things that weren't there. Right? It's like our sitting there looking at the trees was present. It was absolutely present. Language instantaneously starts. That's why Tolkien, when he talks about the power of language, the power of the adjective, the power of spells, right? But all speaking is this kind of spell, because you're talking about things that were there and things that will be there. It's hard to stay. The language is hard to stay completely in the present, because the present is just now, right? It's where dogs live. It's this focus and attention on the present. We live in this expanded attention of the past and the future. And what you're describing with the COVID mandates and the lockdowns and such, that was the blog post that I wrote back in May 2020, right when I started the Dragon Common Room, actually as my Telegram chat, about how everyone was using the presence of the virus as an excuse not to do stuff, and time was just kind of dribbling away. It all turned into a Salvador Dali painting, right? That one, the melting clocks, right? It's just nothing. You could go for days and days and days, and nothing. You could never know whether it was going to happen or not, and because the virus might interrupt and then just destroy all sense of you can plan. there's a toxicity in over planning, but there's also a toxicity in having nothing to look forward to do, to plan, to be able to structure together. So yeah, that when you were talking about we were just in this desert of shifting dunes, and that the tea time was an oasis. That is it, literally what the monasteries were originally designed for. One, to go out in the desert and fight demons because that's where they are, but two, to give training to the soul within life so that it has that significance and structure.
Yeah, we found our monastic discipline in the COVID madness. It was magnificent. It was different too. I think that I really saw when Australia went into the eye of the storm of this media maelstrom, you know, that people were forgetting about life very quickly, even though they were desperate to preserve it. And I think the most beautiful thing about having the art projects that we've been working on is that we've actually been focused on life consistently for the few years since this all started. By gathering it together and knitting it into a tapestry to connect what's been happening to what happened before we were here. This kind of weaving experience that we've been doing, it can seem, it could have seemed such a waste of time, but it's like, you know, when fishermen are out on boats, they used to do this. The Celtic fishermen used to take wool with them, and they'd be knitting as they were fishing. They were master knitters, quite renowned for their knitting. And it's just because they were doing that as they were sitting there and having conversations. And so it's like the art becomes the way of forming something tangible in a time when your experience could be wasted, staying connected to everything. I don't know, having your hands on it. And we were doing this with these stories, but while everybody was forgetting that simple things like being able to have human touch was important to human life. You know, the entire experience of the world. I mean, we've removed everything. We've removed everything that makes us human for years. And so what I had when I was working with you in the poems was reconnecting to something human. And I think that's why I wrote what I wrote in you know, making this phrase art war, because for that kind of moment, it was like, okay, well, now we have to, we're doing art, but it really was like a kind of warfare, because, you know, having to push away all of the messaging that was coming in that said that this is not important. You don't need to have art. You don't need to have beauty. You don't need to have anything that makes you human. You just need to survive.
Right.
You know, just being alive is enough. It's not. There's something about art. And then I was, you know, reading Chesterton, which, you know, kind of made it click for me that we've been created. As you said, we're sub-creators. We've been created in the image of the creator. And Chesterton was talking about these cave paintings and that there's really no such thing as prehistoric man, because every time we find any evidence of prehistoric man, he's doing something like painting on a cave. Chesterton went through this really beautifully and said, well, how do you know he was stupid? He's making art. You know, so it becomes a part of the human experience, is that no matter what kind of technological situation you're in, or environmental situation you're in, or your linguistic mode, people are artists. To be human is to be an artist. So that's why I think it's so important that, you know, we start to think about what's happening, and especially what's happened in the last couple of years. It's an art war. The art war is the war to stay human, despite this techno dystopia that everybody seemed to have been hypnotized by.
Well,
That
that's yes, and that's the irony of it. It's like, oh, the humanities, what are they good for? You can't make a living with them. It's like you can only make living. Yeah, I mean, it's like you can only live.
Yes.
You can't make a living with them. You can live with them. Chestertonian is like I need to warm up on my Chestertonian paradoxes. But you're saying that what we had with the COVID stuff was a significant moment of a test, but it's actually a demonstration of the reality of life, which is we need the art. And what you just said now is the art war is the war to be human, because we are. It's like I keep saying meaning, that art gives us meaning and beauty. So truth, beauty, and goodness. So it gives us both the meaning and the joy and our morality that we cannot. I mean, it's like the strongest version. We cannot be moral without our art. And everything that wants to say the alchemical machine is sufficient, as you said, just like hook you up to a machine and keep you alive so that you're what, right? Breathing meat,
breathing,
right? It's like you're breathing meat. That's it. Whereas human beings need both language. We have the sense of time and this structuring of it, so that it's not just enjoyment, right? It's actually cognitively necessary to make art.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's something about that, getting back into the political thing, but this is why I've never liked saying I'm a conservative, and because I'm not a conservative, and I find that it's an interesting problem in the conservative world that there are not many artistic people. Now, everyone's going to scream and cry, but I don't care. I grew up with hard left, like hard left people, very creative people, like wonderfully high achieving creatives that were all hard left. There's something about the problem with the conservative world defining itself with this fiscal conservatism and forgetting that humans are not economic units, and abandoning the human as artist, where they leave this horrendous impression that people that are weird and like actually being sub-creators and want to just mess around and make everything beautiful, well, you don't really have a home there, because it's just ones and zeros and it's all economic policy and blah. So then you've got all these people, like the kind of people that I grew up with, who find they've got to go and rush in the other direction, and they've all been captured and captivated by whatever fables and stories have been swirling around in that section of our civilization, because they're inherently storytellers, so they're connected to the stories. And so, I mean, I find it very interesting that I had so much exposure to the American music that I did when I was younger, because of these kinds of exchanges through singing, through song, and that's because creative people want to be immersed in the storytelling in some way, visually, or making songs or whatever. And somehow that soup of stories, as you put it with Tolkien, like that soup of stories that all of these creative people have been swimming in, has been infected with bad viruses. These bad linguistic viruses which have attached themselves to those fables. And this is a kind of way of looking at it where I don't get too furious with the people that I know that have kind of gone off the deep end of, whatever like woke agenda has been inserted. Because if you're somebody who enjoys being in story time constantly, then you don't want to leave it. The problem is that story time for the human artist has to it has to be modeled on the storyteller, the creator, or the story gets hijacked. So, yeah, I mean, I have no idea how I started that sentence. I got lost. And that's how easy it is. I just kind of go in there,
Right.
and then you're whirling around.
No, and this is, we're actually...
You lose orientation. Suddenly, wow, I don't know where I am. Oh, I'm at a drag queen story time now with my kid on the lap of some like 6'2" guy in a wig. Wow. That's how it happens. You know?
But no, this
really.
is, so we're going as we usually do, which is why I enjoy working with you. It's like, how did we get there? I'm not sure.
Sorry.
No, well, so we were thinking about the art war and the timing and the spiritual training and stuff like that, but I hadn't put together, I mean, it is a frustrating element of whatever culture war we're in, that, you know, which side, who has control of the storytelling, and it's like the economic story. I mean, this is what's interesting about Spenser and the Fairy Queen, because we've talked about this before, that the Elizabethans are creating one kind of story that tells them that the main story that you want is to get the gold. Gold digging, and that we've also pointed to this, which remind people of it, that gold digging involved first going in and stealing all the property of the monasteries, which is interesting. So we're saying that our Dragon Common Room is modeled on a monastic regularity of meet regularly and tell stories and sing in meter, and that the Elizabethans, I mean, first the Henry and then Elizabeth, actively stole from the monasteries to then go off and make, I mean, ironically, Spenser is trying to make art for Elizabeth, and Shakespeare writes plays that get performed in her court. But then it's like, how do we end up with no art on the side of, wait, what? Right? It's like it's a whole fracturing of the culture. I don't think it's necessarily the left and the right. We've talked about that before too. It's like this, the wholeness of the human experience, which the monasteries actually understood. They were both labor and prayer, right? So their work, you know, cultivating and building and craftsmanship and economic management and landowning and stuff like that, and the art that was split in two, right? So we have this, we've talked about this a lot, right? That split between, oh yes, there's economic man and there's artistic man, and these two are separate and at odds with each other. And we would like your gold so that we can write our story, please. That in itself is one of the great sort of myths of modernity, that you're going to be fractured out in this way. It's interesting that Spenser really wasn't part of that. I mean, what he wanted to do was make this heroic, virtuous allegory to show Elizabeth as, in fact, queen. I mean, she's the queen of the fairies, right? She's the fairy queen, Gloriana, which she doesn't appear as a character in the story that much. Ironically, it's like named for the character that isn't there. But he's trying to show the way in which these adventuring knights are tested by vice and temptation and battles and things like that, and emerge virtuous. It didn't work, except it really kind of did, sort of, or did it? It's hard to. I mean, no one who reads the Fairy Queen. I'm sure you guys are like totally, dying in dread when we keep saying, "Oh yes, we're modeling this story on the Fairy Queen." She's gone silent again. Okay, so yeah, so much so that we've lost Kilts back to the real life. This is you appreciate how professional we can seem when we pretend that we actually have like studios and stuff in the midst of our family going, "Where's the laundry?"
That's exactly what's happening.
How good am I, right? I figured it out. It's the laundry.
She knows.
I know all.
I
mean, if we keep going on and telling you over and over and over again, we've modeled this on the Fairy Queen, is that going to persuade you to say, yes, I want stories of knights and dragons and beautiful damsels, and it's written in iambic pentameter? Oh goodness, I don't think I can deal with it.
No, they're not going to care.
They're not going to care, are they? They're never, 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 never going to care. because, and I think
No.
this is going back to our earlier meditations. You want, okay, so there is the desire to be in a story that shows you something you hadn't realized before, and we like being surprised and delighted by stories. Except we don't. We hate it. We basically always want to find ourselves in the same story, which is why genre fiction is popular. I would say I want a mystery novel. I want a kind of story that I know is going to give me a certain kind of problem experience, right? If I have a sci-fi thriller, it's going to be one thing. If I have a fantasy romance, it's going to be another thing. And genre is, I think you were actually sharing something recently about this in our writing group. Genre is actually your friend because it helps you craft structures of stories that have, I don't know, not just that feed at people's expectations, but people like being satisfied by a sense that, like, I know where I am in this story. That's not a bad thing. If it's a romance, I want it to end happily. It's a comedy. Right? Yes. If it's a horror story, well, I still want it to end unhappily, but after the bad guy gets taken out, right? And, it's the there are, and people are very unsatisfied when stories don't reincorporate elements. So you want the Chekhov's gun, right? There's an element in the story at the beginning. It needs to be meaningful. We are pattern seeking, like scavengers. We desperately want the stories to all fit together and match up. And so the occult story is actually just one version of the story. It's like, I'm going to be given occult wisdom and escape from this world and, have power over everybody.
Well, it's fragmented. It's fragmented. It's not integrated.
Right.
And maybe this is why the Fairy Queen didn't work, but did work. Because it was, I mean, the Elizabethan era was the disintegration of England, because the tapestry was torn. You've got Catholic England, and then you've got Protestant Elizabethan England. And there's this literal schism that happens in the country where the monasticism is raided by pirates. And so this fusion of work and prayer, ora et labora, is there's a rift. It's like it's completely diffused, and then this poem is created around it to kind of encourage virtue and vice, but the poem can't work if it's not connected to what already existed. It's sort of like overlooking the elephant in the room that Elizabeth had, kind of rebooted England as this Protestant pirate machine, and then no one talk about the elephant in the room. What's that? We used to be Catholics.
Yeah.
Or, like the monarch is hunting down everybody just because they're practicing their ancestral religion. Cough. Don't talk about it. So maybe there's an element of that. I'm not sure. But the pattern in genre is probably something to do with that. Again, stitching to existing layers. People like to build on what they already know. I mean, I like surprises, but not to the point where what modernity has done, which is, what do they call it? It's like an act of defiance. Every little bit of art is like an act of defiance, or it's a radical act of defiance, or whatever. And it's like, they're defying what exactly? Pleasure. We're going to create something specifically to mock
I see where you're going. Yes,
pleasure,
but the thing is, I mean, the reason that's ultimately sort of going to destroy everything is the mockery depends on the existence of the actual primary story. Yes. And once you mock sufficiently, I mean, I think that's certainly what's happening in the satire. Not so much satire. Satire is more powerful. We wrote satire in Centuries of Games. The way in which everything is edgy and destructive. It's like when you have literally no center, and the margins have eaten it. Yes. There's nothing left. They've denied that a prototype. They've denied a prototype exists, and then attempting to destroy prototype. Right. But no, you cannot. It's like having a body without a skeleton.
you know,
Okay, so everybody
dead flesh and
watching,
skin,
this is
but
what
yeah.
it's like for me working with kilts. It's like I'll have an idea that we had
Sorry.
a story, and then we'll start
I'm doing it again.
talking, and then I'm in 18 different news stories. And no, actually, our plot was people like finding out they're in the same story. How topical is that, right? Okay, so I know the thing is, I think what you're saying, the Fairy Queen didn't work. We talked about that a couple episodes ago. That I mean, even Elizabeth may or may not have ever read it, and it didn't take off. I mean, Shakespeare. I mean, to be fair, Shakespeare didn't take off. Shakespeare has the cultural presence that it does, not because of the 17th century in which all the theaters were closed because of the Puritans, but because of revival. And we talked about Spenser too, that it's more, there's a modern revival of Spenser in the 19th century with the Victorian medievalism, and not so much at the time, because he doesn't really succeed in remaking a myth that undoes what Elizabeth and her father did with the destruction of the previous fabric. So it's actually hard making new stories, I think, is the lesson there. I mean, and Spenser is trying, right? He's playing off of some of them, like Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, Torquato Tasso's Jerusalem Delivered. I've read some of Ariosto. I should keep reading because it's fun, and like they have to go to the moon to get Merlin's wits back and stuff because he's mad. But I confess I haven't gotten that far into it. And Jerusalem Delivered. And Spenser was writing for people that knew those stories, these great epic poems that go on for, you know, volumes and volumes. And so his audience probably had some context there, but it's not clear to me that at the time he succeeded in creating a story that everybody could resonate with. And therefore stories fail, right? If they don't seem to tap into what people quote already know, they fail. But therefore this is not doing a great advertisement for our story. We're modeling on Spenser's Fairy Queen, and he didn't succeed. Except ironically, he did only later, in, for example, the form of the book that I'm showing you now, which is a reprint from George Allen Ruskin House. An illustrated one, and edited, and it's got there Una and her lion. Therefore, you know, oh wait, a lady and a lion. That sounds cool. Maybe I'll read a story about that. It's got some pictures, and that's great. How should I tell it? How should we say? So, I've been thinking about like press releases for our work, and saying, so you're in the elevator with someone and saying, oh yeah, and you hand them the card that, here, we've been working on this, and it's got a beautiful picture on it and such, and they say, yeah, it's an electric fairy tale, and they go, and you say, oh yeah, it's modern on Spenser's Fairy Queen, and the eyes are glazing over, and you're just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to pitch this?
Yeah.
Oh wait, I've got it. It's Star Wars with dragons. You think we're kidding. We're actually entirely serious, and we have scholarship to prove it, which is this wonderful article by, I will tell you, Richard Keller Simon, in a book called Trash Culture, Popular Culture and the Great Tradition, right? And I haven't read his whole book, but I have read the chapter on Star Wars and the Fairy Queen. And guess what? George Lucas is a thief. Wait, no. George Lucas is a creative sub-creator, because of course all art, as V.A. Boston has beautifully said in one of her video comments on our Mosaic Arc, she said it better, and it's on our website, that all art is okay, I'm gonna look on our website because I like the way she said it. Just a sec. You go to our website and you look at behind the scenes, and we'll give you all of our references to all the things we've been reading, because unlike some, we give footnotes. Art is referential. I think it has to be. No one but God creates ex nihilo. So art is referential. It's always referring to itself. It's referring to previous stories. It's referring to the retellings, right? Basically, like we said, there's only one story. We keep telling the same story over and over and over again. And the Wayne Booth's famous formulation of it was, there's only two plots. You go on a journey, or a stranger comes to town.
Mm-hmm.
oh wait, it's the same story, right? So, there's different stories from different perspectives, but in fact, we keep telling the same stories over and over and over again, and that's what George Lucas did. And delightfully enough, we now understand that what he did in Star Wars was in fact character by character retell Spenser's Fairy Queen. So guess what, guys? You already know the story. And I'm going to prove it with a little bit of reading from Simon's Star Wars and the Fairy Queen here. That the Star Wars created for so many of us, kind of self-included, but not really, because I never really went full force, right? But certainly for many people, it's like Star Wars is the anchor of their mythology, and I absolutely appreciate that. I do not like anything after the first three, as far as I'm concerned. The three movies, I don't know what the other ones are doing, but I do recognize chaos, consternation, though, with the Gen X people. Yeah, it was the three that we saw when we were kids. Sorry, and seeing the ones that came out in the '90s, not the same soundtrack, not the same story. But what Lucas managed to do is create a mythology that is not in fact new. It's in fact Spenser's Fairy Queen, and we will now proceed to prove it. But the sense that we had of sort of going and saying we need to retell this Fairy Queen story and fight it, right? This is the irony. It's like our Draco Alchemicus is in fact both modeled on Spenserian verse forms and desire for allegory and complexity of fairy world and stuff, and of course fighting the great dragon that is in fact Spenser's own story, the Protestantism of it. But you already know it because you've already seen Star Wars and probably memorized it.
No.
You haven't seen Star Wars?
I've seen snippets of Star Wars. So
it's completely lost on her. See, this is our problem, right? If you haven't seen Star Wars, you'll have no idea what our poetry is about. Wait.
As a perfect illustration of cultural disintegration, every single time I've tried to sit down to watch Star Wars, beginning to end, I inevitably fall asleep.
You end up in dream time. Yes, very good.
I end up in dream time. Or I've walked into a room as everyone's already been watching parts of it. So I've seen parts of Star Wars that have not been in chronological order, which kind of explains how I talk to you in our conversations.
I don't think horror is the right word. I think sort of Milo has this experience talking to me, it depends. I know things he doesn't expect me to know, like Lone Wolf and Cub, which I read, in the manga versions, because when I was obsessing on samurai, I found all of that. But then I don't know other things, right? And he's like, how could you not know this, right? And that sense of, do you know the story or you not? That's what people are upset about when they say we are losing the culture, right? What they're losing is the sense that people are in the same story, that you've got the character reference, you've got the plot reference, that I can say, okay, you have watched The Hobbit, you do know The Hobbits, yes? Can we do Hobbits? I'm gonna die now when she says no.
That we can do.
On, thank goodness. Right. That it's interesting.
No,
but it's funny because if you know the story, you're suddenly in this whole world of references and associations and allusions that are meaningful. Whereas if you don't know the story, and there is always this problem of when do you introduce them, right? We have this problem as Christians. It's like you need to tell the kids the stories as they're growing up so that they will have this sensation of being in the story, so that when you get to the part where, oh yes, they crucify him and then spend your life meditating on what that part of the story means and who they are and what the situation is and who he was and who his mom was and all of that it just this ricocheting sense of belonging in that narrative. If you don't get it when you're growing up, it's different from if you get it later. And the stories, and we talk about this, the nursery rhymes and the stories that we get when we're children, all of this matters, right? It really, it absolutely critically matters what stories you hear as you're growing up.
Oh, yes. Yes, it does. Well, this is why people are getting upset with you and other
what do? I tell
people
stories.
That are out
Don't know what they're talking about.
There's the problem. Well, it's that they don't know the references. You know, it's like you're talking about Star Wars, and they have no idea what you're talking
Right.
about, and then they're getting angry with you instead of realizing that they just don't understand the story that you're trying to explain to them. So
This is true.
instead of admitting, like, I've never actually watched Star Wars 1, 2, and 3 in chronological order, so I know references kind of, but it would be basically the same thing as you trying to explain Christendom, medieval Christianity, you know, Marian devotion, all of those kinds of things, the experience of Christians prior to, you know, the iconoclastic Protestantism, especially the Elizabethan era, and what it did to the understanding of Mary and Christ, and all the temple imagery, all of it gone. So it's like us trying to explain Star Wars to people that have never seen it, that kind of part of the world. And it's like, okay, what does that mean? That means we're not the same. We don't have the same culture. We've lost the continuity there. There's like a completely different thing.
Well, but I mean,
So
the irony is, of
what I
course,
put
there's
in-
never such a thing as continuity. There's the stories you heard when you were growing up. And
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean by continuity. I mean, like, a tradition of passing down that story, and however it's been passed down.
right. But this is I said this. I mean, so what's interesting is that most of the time, the stories that people feel like they're like everlasting, and you know, I can go back to right now. I'm on this slide is on the Star Wars. Excuse me, I'm burping. 1977 poster. But if we go back to the Spenser Fairy Queen cover, this is from the 19th or early 20th century. I found it on archive.com. I really should get my references better so I can footnote everything so people don't get mad at me about that. But there's a whole period between when Spenser publishes this poem and these 19th century illustrated picture versions when nobody's reading it, right? It's archaic. It's overlong. It's not that stories can recapture people's imagination, obviously. And I mean, that's what's interesting. On the one hand, we're only ever telling the stories that we already heard. And on the other hand, stories do have a sort of recovery. It's like, and it's interesting how they can be recovered by artists who are retelling them.
Like a language.
Yeah.
It's exactly like a language revival. Well, I put the example in the blog post, in the article that was published a couple of days ago, that the immersion into being a Greek meant that you knew Greek stories.
Right.
You'd grown up hearing Greek stories. That defined Greek identity in all the city-states, their particular mythology, their stories. But just being Greek meant you knew Greek stories. And how did you know Greek stories? Because you were spoken to as a child in the Greek language, transmitting the Greek stories. So that's identity through fable, you know, how we're going to bequeath an identity. It's okay, we'll teach these Greek, we will make these children Greek. How? We will give them Greece, this fairyland of the Hellenic world that defines everything, you know, the intra-referentiality of all of the characters and the motifs and the archetypes and the prototypes, and how, you know, the gods and all of the things are gone. So that made you a Greek. And that process has been forgotten in this really weird kind of moment now that we have in the West, where we're worrying about identity as what they say, intersectionality, the intersection. It's like traffic control. It's just still, you know what I mean? It's like you're on the intersection of what? Like, this is a highway?
Yes, no, that's traffic. True. Yes, it's a traffic control problem.
This is not life. You know, no one's living in your car. So it's like they're picking, I know this is weird, but this is how I think. You're picking terms to define how you're trying to say that you're created and formed by your experiences, but then still using all of this commercial linguistic terminology, which essentially puts you back into being economic unit, you know, and reframing this all as like, oh, this makes me who I am because of what? Because I have this kind of label, not this is the myth that I am in. Like, I am in this one, you know, this is what makes me X. This makes me Greek. Why? Because I'm in this myth.
Well,
and
so
my
I think
people told this story.
I mean, that's
so it's just this really odd sort of like.
That's why we're having the history wars here about the 1619 project and things like that. It is a mythological problem of saying which story are you going to say is primary. But going back to say the commercial, the intersectionality and stuff, it's all branding, right? I've been thinking about this because in order to launch our Kickstarter, we needed to be able to, like, you know, show it's like Star Wars with dragons. But I mean, in fact, that's an attention getter that then we still have to unpack. A logo, a visual is suddenly, it's like all there all at once. We started last week in our, we have a team of 4 hobbits, right, that are trying to do all of this and start showing it to people a lot, right? And then you get this sense of, oh, I've already seen that. This exercise of I've seen that. Oh, what is it? That works best with an icon, which is saying why. I think thinking about, now I don't remember who were we talking about this, saying without, oh golly, without iconography we can't have any knowledge. But now I don't remember who I was talking with. When was that, you? Drat. Okay, so that we designed a logo image to use on our branding, right? And then I started realizing that you know, oh golly, I've done what happens when I talk to you and I don't have my anchor. I lost the story. I'm out in the sea. Help!
No, we're thinking about creating the icon because otherwise we're just trying to explain the story to everybody.
Which doesn't work. You need an image in your head. Yes, no, you need an image in your head to start anchoring the story before you start telling the story. Yes.
It starts with image.
Yes.
It has to start with image in the mind before it comes out. Otherwise, there's nothing. So,
yes.
Yeah. It starts with icon.
But I was okay. Hold that.
No,
the idea of
you were saying that.
We promised to show you guys some of our process. This is what it's like.
It's so much fun. I love it.
You're going to be amazed that the poem actually is linear and you can read it from beginning to end and it all fits together with pictures.
Thanks to you.
Mainly, yes, because I do chronology and history, right? And there's a thread that runs through all of it. And then she's going, it's going to be this. And I'm like, you've got to have a narrative. And that's we're going to have to do an episode, particularly on the comics level of it, the picture and text that we work with. But no, so go back to the branding thing. It's like that I was thinking also about how all of the wars that we're fighting right now there's sort of magical contagion, right? You want something to, when someone sees your brand, you want this cascade of ideas to come with it. And therefore, and because, oh no, this, I think I didn't tell you that I was thinking about this, so this is all a little bit undone. That branding becomes the way in which we think about everything from the 20th century because of advertising, right? And so the brands that are associated with advertising stories, they always want to be, you know, it's like if you see the Twilight Zone, it's going to be with that soap, right? So everything is like this magical contagion of brands with stories is the bigger context of what we've been fighting, which is this sort of heraldic chivalry association with everything, brand and story. And so everybody doesn't want their brand associated with the wrong story. That explains why, you know, you have the wrong story. You try to associate your brand with a story. Nobody likes that story. Brand explodes. That's a little too densely compacted still there. But I was thinking about it because we were trying to create our brand for our story. And let's say, what do we want it associated with? We want it associated with Christianity and dragons and fairy tales and, you know, and then I was thinking about keywords and I couldn't figure out what the other ones were, right? But it's because of the power of that logo association, It's iconography. And that's what I was you're saying. That's why with the commercial revolution, with the Elizabethans, when you destroy all the icons, you destroy people's ability to anchor themselves in the story. I think that's where I was going. Iconography is in fact a destruction of the ability to think at all. Iconoclasm. Iconoclasm. I can't do it. Iconoclasm destroys your ability to think.
Yes.
That's how powerful it is, and that's why brands are attacked, icons are attacked. There's this attack on, and it's visceral is the wrong adjective for it. I mean, your entire being can be wrapped up in your ability to recognize that image.
Yes. So I've got really two really nice examples of this in terms of advertising and iconoclasm, like the power of having this iconic kind of invasion. So in Australia now, Pfizer, the pharmaceutical company, are promoting this thing this political argument that's going on right now. It's called the Voice to Parliament, where basically Republicans that are not overtly calling themselves Republicans want to enshrine this thing called Voice to Parliament for First Nations people. It's a different debate, whatever. I was really interested in pharmaceutical company like Pfizer has created this advertisement to promote Voice to Parliament. So you kind of wonder, like, what business do you have in Indigenous affairs? You're a corporation, right? They put the Pfizer logo over this really horribly designed, it was so disgusting. It was supposed to be like Aboriginal art, which I really like the dot paintings. And it's not art like for aesthetic's sake. You know, it's got its own kind of technological function. And it has to be connected to the culture, it has to be connected to the storytelling. So hopefully this kind of like links to what we're doing here. It's intra-referential. It's connected to other pieces, and they all fit together in this big mosaic, and this all fits together all over the continent of Australia. And then you've got a narrative then, and everyone knows where they belong. They know who their people are because they know what story they're in and what part of the story they're telling. Pfizer sticks a logo over the top of it, makes this horrible version of this dot painting. It's just awful. And I looked at it and it was like screaming at me, this like horrible visual violence of all of a sudden this corporate brand inserting itself into Indigenous aesthetic. But what actually it looked like to me was it was the intrusion of this multinational corporation in Dreamtime. You have no business in there. You don't belong in there. These stories don't include Pfizer, right?
Right, but they know what they're doing and trying to attach their brand to that. Yeah.
They do. So it's like, we're going to get in there. You're penetrating this, like, they're penetrating the native psychodrome, right? This is really kind of intense sort of experience for someone who thinks like in a iconistic kind of way.
We're trying to get you all in this trip, you realize.
Yeah, you never leave it once you're in, and then the brand is there, so it's like this horrible, like, imagine this beautiful like kind of map, and then someone's just it's like they've slapped an ad on top of it. It's like you're in a Yosemite National Park or something, somewhere very, 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 very beautiful in America. And then all of a sudden there's a McDonald's in the middle of Yosemite. That's what it looks like. And so this is what they're doing to the visual field of the story or the culture. So there was that example. And then another one I forgot because I was ranting too much.
Eventually we have to write all this down so that it turns into something that we can recover and come back to. But the thing is, going back to when your identity is made commercially, you're nothing but brands, and advertising is, of course, the identity politics stuff is it's a straight up artifact of marketing, because you are trained to think I can only the branding. They say we want people to associate themselves with the story. So we've been saying this before. It's like you want to find yourself in the story. That's the power of stories. Advertising is all little stories. Dorothy Sayers has this great take on it in Murder Must Advertise, where the advertisers are creating all these kind of archetypal characters like the prudent housewife and the, you know, the energetic businessman and such. And all ads are tiny stories that you're meant to find yourself inside. And of course, since they have only a brief amount of time because of the way we set up advertising, although infomercials maybe are longer, right? This is an infomercial for our Kickstarter, that you have to do it in these very caricature forms. And so, you know, if I want to get you to think you're inside this story, I need to get something that I think looks like a mirror, what you think you're going to look like. And it's that mirroring effect. And of course, when people don't want to drink Bud Light anymore because they don't see themselves in the character that is now associated with Bud Light, for example, right, it all shatters. Because, you know, they're sort of forcing an identification and a participation in a story that people don't want to participate in. But, you know, advertising completely depends on it. And what's ironic about all of this is this advertising world exists powerfully in a context in which you don't have sacred advertising. You don't have icons anymore. You don't have the story that you can find yourself in as the mythology that gives your life meaning, because you're actually participating in that sacred transcendent reality.
Yeah, there's no sacred cultus. So the second example was Zelensky, the Ukrainian guy, giving his icon to the Roman Pope.
With no Jesus
and then
in it?
Had Virgin Mary and no Jesus. Where's the baby Jesus? No, Jesus is now this black. It's like the black shadow. It's like, you know, the dark matter version of Jesus. Where is he? He's gone. So,
not
you know,
incarnate
it's like,
at all,
wow,
just an outline.
Yeah, exactly. We just disincarnated the baby Christ, and the mother is there. Okay, well, it's the same thing. So disincarnate. This is the problem with the iconoclasm. Also, the idea that people are now trying to create icons that function as sacred icons and inject them into the cultural story and say, you have to follow this and you have to respect this because this thing is now sacred to us, even though it's not a sacred thing. It's connected to advertising and corporate branding. Right. And the two are getting confused. So I tried to put this into the piece by saying, you know, Kirk's definition of the culture was that actually it's based on cultus, the Latin word, which was, you know, how you're cultivating soil, and also the altar that you're worshipping at. Agriculture and God, soil. The soil and your God is making your culture. We have a complete, I mean, not we, but the Western thing called a civilization has forgotten which iconography is sacred and to be experienced and connected to in a way which is reverent and to venerate those icons with due respect versus brands.
Well, I think people do venerate brands. I mean, that's the problem.
No, that's that's what I mean. Like there's no, they don't understand the difference. So now if there's this advertisement which is created, or a false icon which is created and presented to everybody to be the new icon in that particular cultus, okay, we're going to create a new prototype of what this thing looks like a housewife. All right, we're going to create a new prototype for what the working man looks like. Okay, now we're going to create a new prototype for what a man is or a woman is, right? They're changing the iconography of the cultus. Well, who are you to do this? You are not God. You are your advertising agency. I mean, the problem being that people are not recognizing that what they're essentially being told to do is perform the same gestures that we do in our churches in front of an icon to venerate it as the access point to the prototype that's in the icon, right? That same behavior where we kiss it, it's not worshiping the particular, you know, wooden board. We're venerating the prototype inside that image. This same behavior is now being done in an environment where there's a corporate marketing team pushing a new prototype. And that's the main problem with what I was trying to demonstrate that we're dealing with now in this poetry exercise, to make a real distinction on what the cultus is that we're in, because we've been saturated in the branding and the advertising world for way too long, that everyone around us is also saturated in branding and advertising, and they don't have the iconography that takes them away from that and gives them the proper understanding of the sacred, and therefore a real cult, not how everyone would say the word cult usually, where it's just a cult, it's not a religion. Right. Well, our cultus is the center of our focus. The prototype icon of human life, of the art of being alive as a human being, is Christ as the creator. Christ is the artist. So that's our prototype and our icon. How we're basing the cultus of our civilization has to revolve around that icon. Otherwise, we don't have a prototype. And if we don't have a prototype, we end up with replacement prototypes, which is what you were saying in terms of the advertising campaigns.
Right.
We're going to do a story now and show you what the ideal housewife looks like. We're going to do a story now and show you what a real man looks like, which may or may not actually be a man. We're losing our concept of prototype.
Well, I mean, I think it's parasitical on our worship, in fact.
Yeah.
So the Star Wars, which we still promise that we're going to give people, and we've only got 10 more minutes in our scheduled whatever, maybe 15. The movies are participating both in the commercial and in the storytelling, and of course, Star Wars. What I remember, okay, so you didn't see it, so you don't belong in this narrative. No, that
I'm an outsider.
Don't even, you're not even heathen, right? You're not even part of the narrative. And of course, this being the problem, I still need to write the blog post about this. It's like we need to, we're doing this story crafting in all these different ways, right? There's the prose articles, and there's the iconography, and there's our conversations here, and there's so many different ways. This is one of the ones that I have in my mind, is explaining to you all on a blog post why what we're doing is basically Augustine's catechesis, right? It's like, how do you get people to recognize themselves in the story? Okay, that's fine. Now I forgot where I was going. If you can't get them inside the story, they just don't know what you're talking about, right? And I appreciate what you said a bit ago, saying the people that are getting mad at me in my professional field and in the Catholic world is often because they don't know the story that I'm operating within, and so they respond with anxiety. Okay, yes. So all of that bracket, yes, is a huge problem. Where we're dealing is catechesis here, but the catechesis, as Augustine understands it, is showing you're in what story you're in, and if you can't see it, you have no idea what people are talking about. It's a blindness, right? It's the outside of the story, you haven't a clue. Inside of the story you can see clearly, which is another, but maybe we need to do a whole thing on cult. Okay, anyway, the Star Wars problem, that I saw this in 1977 in the theater when it first came out, right? I remember, I don't know how my mother knew about it, or even that I would be interested in it, but it was this, my generation for sure. I was 11, 12, grew up with these three movies, and therefore it is a touchstone and a kind of referent. And this story that's commercially produced, ramified out. I mean, the other thing I remember that Star Wars, before Star Wars, there were no toys that went with movies. After Star Wars, nothing but replicas, and I want to make toys of our poem, right? And it's like, I want to have the gemstone that we're using as our brand. I want to have 3D print. It's like we could manifest all of these characters and costumes and experiences, although Disney is apparently not doing as well as they'd like with that, into the primary world, right? You have the sense of that story becoming it's like the opposite way. Something you go into the story and imagine yourself in it. It comes into our world and manifests itself there. So Star Wars clearly did something super powerful, and interesting to realize that it's because it's retelling the Fairy Queen, which wanted to achieve all of that to begin with, right? It's like Spenser wanted to make a new myth for the Elizabethans to live inside of that included virtue and dragons and so forth. And Lucas succeeded where Spenser didn't, although what Lucas was doing was playing off of retellings that maybe he grew up with. We've since learned in the past day or so from the Dark Herald that in fact Lucas basically just took other stories and I mean, it's like I have my next slide is no I have that there's the Fairy Queen. No, not Star Wars. No, this one. That Indiana Jones is in fact Harry Steele, literally the same costume that Charlton Heston wears in this movie about the Incas. We will now go back to Star Wars. Okay, I'll go back to Star Wars is
tomb raiding and fairy tale.
Tomb raiding and fairy tale. So we know Lucas does nothing but straight up lift characters, costumes, and plots from other stories, and he did it with the Fairy Queen, right? So I will now read a bit from Simon. All right. Spenser's poem is a long, elaborate, imaginative sequence of stories or books about the knights of fairyland and their struggles to learn holiness, temperance, chastity, friendship, justice, and courtesy. In the first and most frequently taught book of the Fairy Queen, the part that serves as the basis for Lucas's story, the topic is holiness, which is interesting, therefore, that Star Wars, in fact, becomes... Now I'm showing the Night of Holiness. Star Wars, in fact, becomes a new religion for people now. And I think it's because it's got this moral character for the structure of the story and the character, the moral character. I'm gibbering. Star Wars works, in fact, because it is a kind of fairy story that will create this sort of response, right? Spenser designed it that way. It works. And the topic is holiness. The young and inexperienced Red Cross Knight takes up the cause of an innocent woman named Una, fights an evil magician named Archimago, requires the help of a perfect knight named Arthur, learns religious faith from an old hermit named Contemplation, and finally masters holiness, an accomplishment that allows him to destroy the hellish monster that has taken control of Una's land. Got all that? Right, so there's the Red Cross Knight is the main character, Una. The Archimago is the evil magician. The perfect knight named Arthur. He learns from a hermit, masters holiness, and defeats the dragon. Okay, everybody who knows Star Wars should be like shuddering in horror at the recognition. Okay, in Lucas's version of the story, the young and inexperienced Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker takes up the cause of an innocent woman named Princess Leia, fights an evil magician named Darth Vader, requires the help of a less than perfect fighter named Han Solo, learns religious faith from two old hermits named Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, and finally masters the Force, an accomplishment that allows him to destroy the evil empire, the hellish monster that is taking control of Leia's republic. It's literally the exact same story.
Dun, dun,
Dun,
dun.
dun, dun. Yes. And it's not just Campbell, Hero of a Thousand Faces. I mean, this is what's funny about Lucas. He admits that he used like Campbell a lot, I guess, and I don't know that he ever like openly said I use Spenser, but we know from the way in which he definitely pulled Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones character literally from Harry Steele, Charlton Heston's character. Although Harry Steele is, kind of a rogue and a bit of a thief, which I guess Indiana Jones is too. It's yes. Like if I watched The Secret of the Incas this afternoon to prep for tonight, and yes, can confirm that the Dark Herald is exactly right. It's the same character with the same costume, with the same supporting cast, with the same, it's like Baloche is, modeled on the archaeologists they find excavating Machu Picchu and the Inca thing. That Marcus Brody is modeled on Harry Steele's sidekick. The airplane, the blah blah. It's like every single point. Lucas is definitely a magpie in the degree to which he's picking up these structures from the stories. And so it's very, very interesting that Star Wars, given its vast cultural influence over the last generation
Mm.
is in fact the Fairy Queen. So when we say we're doing the Fairy Queen with dragons, or the Star Wars with dragons, yeah, you already know this story, but you didn't realize it. So it says almost everything of importance that we see in Star Wars movies has its origin in the Fairy Queen, from small details of weaponry and dress to large issues of chivalry and spirituality. A dazzlingly bright light shield represents the special force of Christian spirituality in the Fairy Queen, just as a special effects lightsaber represents a similar spiritual force in Star Wars. Both are instrumental in the battle against evil. A powerful lion protects Una and represents the natural world in Spenser, just as a lion-like humanoid named Chewbacca protects Luke and Leia and represents the natural world in Lucas. Una wears white and is accompanied by a dwarf, just as Leia wears white and is accompanied by 2 androids, C-3PO and R2-D2. And just as Una's dwarf gathers up weapons, gives directions and information when he can, functions as a servant, C-3PO and R2-D2 do the same. There are numerous figures of darkness and night in Spenser, all dressed in black and associated with hell. In Lucas, Darth Vader and the evil Emperor are dressed in black and associated with the Death Star. Red Cross wears the image of a cross at the beginning of his story, and Luke gains what appears to be a clerical collar near the end of his. It goes on and on. It's like it's the same story. I mean, with some significant, interesting differences between the Force and Christianity, but because Spenser is Protestant and therefore, trying to destroy the Catholic Church, that the Force is so saying. Lucas just changed Spenser's story, as some of these examples begin to suggest, adapting the Elizabethan poem to contemporary American realities. The desirable religion in the Fairy Queen is Protestant Christianity, caught up in battle with a depraved Roman Catholicism. Spenser was partisan in the religious struggles of his time. The desirable religion in Star Wars is the non-sectarian Force, a generalized inner spirituality that echoes Eastern mysticism. Arthur is the perfect British knight in the Fairy Queen, a symbol of the might that will be England, straight, good, and sober. Han Solo is a flawed and fallen fighter who must be redeemed in Star Wars, a symbol of particularly American wisecracking daredevil, and so forth, right? But it's like the adjustments are not nearly so significant as the fact that it's the same story.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that it's it makes sense why suddenly there's an explosion of merchandise around this film.
The Force.
The Force.
Right.
Yeah.
It's this explosion of iconography of fairy bursting into reality. It's like the Lucas managed to activate everything that Spenser had hoped for. And the thing is, in the Elizabethan period, we've seen that people started playing out, they're playing out the Arthurian stories, they're having pageants and so forth like that. It's like, insofar as people now go to conventions in costume and play out all of these characters, they are literally doing exactly what the Elizabethans were doing. It's like Star Wars and Ren fairs are the same thing. Guys, it's our story is Star Wars. It's like it's sci-fi fantasy. They're the same thing. And I have at BasedCon, I did a talk a couple of years ago where I was talking about the Ring and how it's both sci-fi and fantasy. It's like the origin. It's like, as we said, with the economic and artistic, all of these twinnings, these broken twins are present here. And one is sci-fi and fantasy. They're not different. They're actually the same story.
Mystic tech.
Yep. Mystic tech.
Mystic tech. Yep. Yeah. Prayer and work being united suddenly. It's very cool.
It's very cool.
It's very cool. Yeah. Quite cool. Well, I'm wondering now, okay? So we have this explosion of dress-ups, people wanting to enter into Star Wars, which is based on the Fairy Queen. What has the culture done in re-entering Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen in a sci-fi aesthetic, you know. This is a kind of reboot of Protestant civilization somehow, isn't it? It's upgraded, and now I'm wondering how that has affected everybody in the sense of the power versus prototype that everyone has been referring to, the Force, for so many years. Forces are impersonal and they can be wielded. So, like, I know enough about Star Wars to know that it's like,
see, even you know it when you can't stay awake in the movies.
Exactly. Well, it's like, oh, how hard I've tried to stay away from all of this stuff. And even then you can't. You get it's sort of flung at you. But you know, this impersonal force versus personal logos, incarnate logos, you know. So it's like the whole culture's been it's like rehitched to this Spenserian horse, which was iconoclastic and, you know, wanted to split the monastic. Now that is a very interesting phenomenon.
Well, it's particularly interesting. The Jedi are a kind of monastic order. They're sort of fighting monks, right? That they have to. I do know this much about the later lore, right? That they develop, that they're. I mean, some of them are sort of oblates, like, right? They're trained from birth, as it were, and they have spiritual discipline. I did like this in the I think it's in The Empire Strikes Back. I mean, when Luke does his proper training, it's very mystical, and you know, I'm clearly in it for the monks. But there's no the Force is not incarnate.
It seems to be, what is it, like a Manichaean thing, or like almost like Zoroastrianism. You know, it's like the good and evil balance thing. It's not a person.
Well, it's more Taoist. And I think it's Eastern, so it's a balance of forces rather than you're fighting the evil and that's the dragon, right? And so, but, I mean, this is here in the picture I have up now is the false Duessa, right? So she is the representation in the poem of the church, the Catholic Church. And here she is enthroned, and she's got her dragon. She's quite magnificent. Looks like an African, a black-skinned person holding her peacock feathered fan to show you whose side are we on by this point. But that she in Spenser's story is and that I know enough from when I listened to the whole poem, that she keeps showing up regularly. The false Duessa is a regular feature. And in the Star Wars, that feeling of the evil presence is, I mean, it's curious to find out it's like echoing the presence of Catholicism as its power, story power. Which is then, you know, balanced by, you know, the image that indeed, the story of the dragon killing in Spenser is one of the great dragon battles in any literature ever, right? It goes on for stanzas and stanzas. The dragon is massive. There's 3 great engagements. It's a true dragon battle. If you have any image in your head of a massive dragon battle, it's from Spenser ultimately, because the Beowulf battle it's significant, but it's not like this one. And the St. George legends that Spenser is drawing on in order for the Red Cross Knight to fight the dragon, they're not this elaborate. So Spenser is the source of all great dragon battle narratives in English. I think in any language. I think he really like masters this moment, this narrative moment. And we did practice our scansion when we were trying to learn his stanza forms on the dragon episode, and they're fun to read. We should do an entire episode simply reading dragon the dragon battle for you.
The blood coming out.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a Tarantino scene,
Oh,
really,
yeah.
when you read it. Yes. How much blood can come out of this thing? Oh, there's more. Yeah.
And the knight keeps getting, cast down, and then he has to go be, tended by Una, and he recovers, and he goes back into battle, and yeah, it's definitely up there with fight scenes. The superhero fight scenes you've ever read, they're all Spenser, basically. All movie fight scenes of the hero gets overcome by the tremendous monster, and has to go and to have the quiet scene at the night, and then you have the campfire scene where they meditate on the meaning of life, and then go back and battle again. That's Spenser. He did it. He invented this structure.
Yes. So that's the.
Well, at least he's the oldest one I know. Maybe the thing is, I think he really did invent it. I think that's his great genius, that he really did the dragon battle. Which is then what captured everybody's imagination, particularly in the 19th century, when, for example, these drawings are done, or etchings, or whatever they are. Woodcuts? I'm not sure. I mean, it's like we get a lot of illustrated versions of the battle with the dragon from the 19th century, which makes sense then that Lucas would be interested in it as a story. Maybe he had a book of Spenser growing up or something, and that would anchor him in this. I'm not sure there were movies of it before Star Wars. Now that we found out Harry Steele is Indiana Jones is actually Harry Steele, maybe we find it. Could be a Charlton Heston movie I haven't seen before.
We've got to start binging Charlton Heston films.
I'm still on Johnny Depp. We're gonna have to do a Johnny Depp episode too. We're promising you guys a lot. You realize we have not exhausted our material because the story world keeps it's showing itself to us. Revelation of the dragon over and over and over again. It's out there.
Yeah. It is. It is. Hoarding things.
We will capture the gold of the dragon and share it with you in story form.
Yes. But
now we should let you go to sleep, right? All right. This is our story. This is our dragon. I mean, you may have seen it because we keep plastering it all over our social media last year.
Oh, is this thing?
This is the magnificent, not the jewel. I started with that one. This is the gate.
Okay.
With our own dragon slayer facing the gate, which he's about to enter into, so that he will enter into the city. And of course, our dragon admiring itself, as dragons tend to do. And there is, in fact, as good cover art should be, the entirety of the story contained in this one image. We promise. Meditate on this on this mystery, and we hope we can unravel it all for you. It keeps showing the coils of the dragon. They are vast and surprising even to us.
Yep.
You think that's enticed them enough to help with our Kickstarter?
So.
Ooh, let's check in on our Kickstarter so that we can.
If they want to see the snake shed its skin until it's reached its final form, we need the gold.
We have at the moment. We are within $490 of our primary goal. 2 days in, we rock. You guys rock. Look at this. And those of you who watch us in our videos recognize that the Mosaic Ark is your deep backstory of the poem that we've been writing, and that you will therefore understand all of this at levels that only those who watch the Mosaic Ark will really get. So you're already in the secret. You're already in the story. We have absolutely brilliant reward tiers, although what's interesting is most people are subscribing mainly for the books. Which is actually encouraging, right? It's like we had all these goodies out there with cards and the invitation, if you and a friend, if you donate together, if you like to do it that way, can come on the Mosaic Ark and get lost with us for an episode. We also have a very special donor tier that you can have yourself drawn into one of the crowd scenes, right? The mage will cast you into the cat, be in the cast. And we have had one taker on this option, and so therefore one of you is going to be in the story. How cool is that, right? It's just like a medieval manuscript that you get yourself drawn into the story that you have yourself been patron to.
I love it. I'm so excited. I don't know who this person is, but we'll make you look very beautiful.
Yes, we've instructed our artists that the beauty must be brought forth in this particular option. But we're really grateful that those of you who are supporting us are supporting. In fact, the full set of books, right? It's going to be in 5 acts. So we finished writing Act 1, and we are getting the pictures drawn right now of that act, so that we'll be able to send you that book. Hopefully in the next few months, once we get all the layout and beautiful structure of everything down. But that people are actually subscribing to do the whole series. So that's brilliant. We have a lot of work cut out for us, and we know where we're going. We have a plot, we have an arc, we have characters. It's happening. And the symbolism is just like shatteringly showing itself to us constantly. You have no idea how much fun this is to write, but we really hope you enjoy reading it, because it's the story that we're all in, and we are trying to share with you the joy that we have of that story, but also the horror of what it's been like in the particular manifestation of it, which is what Kiltz was showing in thinking about how we started this in the midst of the lockdowns and the mandates and the COVID and the virus and the horror and the terror of the dragon that was capturing the whole world with that particular narrative.
Yeah. Where the attention flows, the power goes.
That's a really good catchphrase. Maybe we can use that in our marketing. Okay, we've had Casey and Mel participate. DRACO ALCHEMICUS is the deconstructed fairy queen, says Casey. Yes. Satan would love to actually disincarnate Christ. I think she was thinking about there with the Zelensky icon.
The Zelensky thing.
Tells all that is needed to know about anyone who would do that to an icon. Indeed. The force of materialism, even its greatest trick, is telekinesis, manipulating material matter. We always manipulate matter. I do it right now. Look, I'm waving my hand. However I did that, right?
You do it when you speak, because sound waves need matter to bounce. They go clack, 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 clack,
right.
clack. It's not like light, which doesn't need a physical thing. You're manipulating matter with your voice box
all the time.
It's very trippy.
We do the trippy here. The DRACO ALCHEMICUS. Drink the spice. Yes. Okay, well, as we have demonstrated, we could go on and on and on, but I think that's enough for them to chew on and meditate on this week, don't you think?
I think so. Yeah, I should probably go and watch Star Wars.
I don't know. Maybe you'll be disappointed. It'd be like me watching the Harry Steele, The Secrets of the Incas tonight, going, I've seen this. How dare he?
I'll report back.
I loved Star Wars 1977 through Empire Strikes Back. The Return of the Jedi, not so much. I was never enamored of the Ewoks. However, people get quite fraught when you attack their stories. I wonder why.
Yeah. No idea.
I have no idea.
Fine.
Why would they be upset if we challenge their stories? Could it be? Okay. Thank you for joining us. Good night.